The Valorian Collective had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. They had conquered more than 10,000 worlds and destroyed any species that dared to resist them. Their warships were the size of small moons, and their weapons could burn entire continents to ash in minutes. No one in the known universe challenged them. No one even thought about it. When their deep space sensors detected strange radio signals coming from a small blue planet in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy, High Commander Zereth barely looked at the report. The signals were primitive, barely a century old. The species that sent them had only recently learned to leave their own world. By Valorian standards, they were like children playing with sticks while adults built empires. Zereth ordered a standard subjugation fleet to deal with the problem. 400 warships, enough to conquer most worlds in a matter of days. He expected the campaign to be finished before the next cycle of reports crossed his desk. On Earth, humanity had no idea what was coming. They had established a colony on Mars 10 years earlier, and their furthest outpost was a small research station orbiting Jupiter. They had discovered signs of intelligent life in the universe, but had not yet made contact with any other species. Most people went about their daily lives without thinking much about what might be waiting for them among the stars. Admiral Patricia Cole was 53 years old. She had spent her entire adult life in the Earth Defense Force, rising through the ranks until she commanded the orbital defense network that protected the planet. It was considered a ceremonial position by most. The greatest threat humanity faced was the occasional asteroid, and the defense grid handled those automatically. Patricia was reviewing maintenance schedules in her office. On Defense Station Alpha, when the first transmission arrived, it came on every frequency simultaneously, overwhelming civilian and military channels alike. The message was in a language no human had ever heard, but it came with a translation matrix that their computers decoded within minutes. The message was simple. The Valorian Collective claimed dominion over all inhabited space. Humanity had 72 hours to surrender unconditionally. If they refused, they would be destroyed. The message included footage of previous conquests, worlds burning, cities crumbling, entire populations being led away in chains. The Valorians wanted humanity to understand exactly what they faced. Patricia watched the footage 3 times. She saw species that looked nothing like humans, but whose fear and despair were unmistakable. She saw mothers clutching children as soldiers dragged them apart. She saw proud warriors throwing down their weapons in defeat. She saw worlds that had resisted, reduced to radioactive wastelands. Then, she picked up her secure communication device and called an emergency meeting of every military commander in the solar system. The meeting took place over encrypted channels. Faces appearing on screens from Luna Base, Mars Colony, the Jupiter Station, and a dozen other locations. Patricia looked at each of them in turn. Some were afraid. Some were angry. Some seemed to be in shock. None of them had ever faced anything like this. "They have given us 72 hours to surrender," Patricia said calmly. "I propose we give them our answer in 12. Commander Kevin Price spoke from Luna Base. He was young for his position. Only 34, but he had proven himself in every simulation and training exercise the Defense Force had ever conducted. "What answer did you have in mind, Admiral?" Patricia allowed herself a small smile. "I want to tell them to come try." The room erupted. Some voices supported her immediately. Others warned that resistance was suicide. The Valorians had conquered hundreds of species. Their technology was thousands of years more advanced. Fighting them would only make things worse. Governor Diana Walsh spoke from Mars Colony. She was a politician, not a soldier, but she had been a Marine before entering government service. Her voice cut through the argument like a knife. "What makes things worse is surrender," she said firmly. "I have watched the footage they sent. I have seen what happens to species that give up without a fight. They become slaves. Their children become slaves. Their grandchildren become slaves. For thousands of years, they serve their conquerors and forget they were ever free." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees, and I believe most humans would choose the same." The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. Humanity would fight. Patricia spent the next 12 hours coordinating with every military force on Earth and in the colonies. Old rivalries between nations were set aside. Enemies who had threatened each other for decades suddenly found common cause. Weapons that had been pointed at each other were redirected toward the stars. Civilians were told to prepare for the worst. Underground shelters that had been built for nuclear war were reopened and expanded. Factories that made cars and appliances were converted to produce weapons and armor. Scientists who had been working on peaceful research were asked to find ways to hurt the enemy. The response to the Valorian ultimatum was broadcast 12 hours after it arrived, exactly as Patricia had promised. She recorded it herself, standing in the command center of Defense Station Alpha, with the blue curve of Earth visible through the window behind her. "To the Valorian Collective," she said, her voice steady and clear. "We have received your demand for surrender. We have seen your threats and your footage of conquered worlds. We understand that you are powerful, and we understand that you expect us to be afraid." She paused, and when she spoke again, there was iron in her voice. "We are afraid, but we will not surrender. This is our home. These are our people, and we will fight for them until our last breath. You want humanity to kneel before you. We have a different answer." She leaned forward slightly. "Come try." The transmission ended. Across the solar system, humans who had been watching cheered or wept or simply sat in stunned silence. They knew what was coming. They knew the odds were against them. But they also knew that they had made a choice, and that choice meant something. High Commander Zereth received the human response aboard his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. He had lived for 300 years and personally overseen the conquest of 47 worlds. He had never received a response like this from a species so primitive. His advisors assured him it was simply ignorance. The humans did not understand what they faced. Once they saw the power of the Valorian fleet, they would change their minds. They always did. Zereth was not so certain. There was something in the human woman's eyes that troubled him. A stubbornness he had rarely seen. A willingness to die that seemed almost eager. He pushed the thought aside. It did not matter. The humans could be as stubborn as they wished. In the end, they would fall like all the others. The collective had been conquering worlds for 12,000 years. This one would be no different, he gave the order. And 400 warships began their advance toward the small blue planet called Earth. The war had begun. The Valorian fleet emerged from hyperspace near the edge of the solar system. 400 warships arranged in perfect formation. Each vessel was enormous by human standards, bristling with weapons that could level cities in seconds. High Commander Zereth stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion and looked at the distant sun with something close to boredom. He expected this conquest to be one of the easiest in his long career. The first human ships his fleet encountered were a patrol squadron near Neptune. 6 small vessels, barely larger than the shuttles the Valorians used to transport cargo. Commander Nathan Brooks led the squadron from the bridge of the patrol ship Vigilant. And he knew from the moment he saw the enemy fleet that his ships had no chance in a straight fight. The Valorians had weapons that could cut through human armor like paper. They had shields that could absorb anything humanity had ever built. Their ships were faster, stronger, and carried thousands of soldiers each. Nathan's entire squadron could not have scratched the paint on a single Valorian warship. But Nathan had not been ordered to win. He had been ordered to buy time and gather information. And he had read the tactical briefings that Admiral Cole had distributed to every commander in the fleet. "All ships scatter pattern Delta," he ordered calmly. "Lead them into the asteroid field. Make them chase us." His pilots obeyed without question. The 6 human ships broke formation and fled toward a dense cluster of asteroids that drifted between Neptune and Uranus. The Valorian commander, watching the engagement, laughed at what he saw. The primitives were running away. Seeking shelter among the rocks, like frightened animals, he ordered his forward ships to pursue and destroy them. 20 Valorian vessels broke from the main fleet and gave chase. They were faster than the human ships, and they closed the distance quickly. Their weapons officers prepared to fire as soon as they had clear shots. This would be over in minutes. The first mine detonated when the lead Valorian ship passed within 100 meters of what appeared to be an ordinary asteroid. The explosion was nuclear, a weapon so primitive that the Valorians had stopped using them thousands of years ago. But the Valorian shields were designed to stop directed energy weapons, concentrated beams that came from a single direction. They were not designed to handle an explosion that attacked from all sides at once. The ship's shields flickered and failed. A second later, 2 more mines detonated, and the vessel broke apart in a ball of fire. 7 more ships were destroyed in the next 30 seconds as they flew into the minefield humanity had been preparing for months. The asteroid belt had been seeded with thousands of nuclear weapons, each one hidden inside hollowed-out rocks and programmed to detonate. When enemy vessels came close, Nathan watched the explosions from a safe distance and allowed himself a grim smile. Then he ordered his squadron to continue their retreat. They had done their job. Now it was time for others to do theirs. High Commander Zirith received the news of the losses with genuine shock. 8 ships destroyed by a species that had only discovered nuclear power a century ago. It was impossible. It was humiliating. His advisors scrambled to explain what had happened, promised that such a trick would not work twice. Zirith was not comforted. He ordered a full analysis of human weapons and tactics. What his scientists found confused them. The humans used technology that the Valorians considered ancient and useless. Chemical rockets, projectile weapons, nuclear bombs, things that belonged in museums. Not on battlefields, but the humans used these primitive tools with a creativity that was deeply unsettling. They did not fight the way they were supposed to fight. They did not follow the rules that every other species had followed for millennia. On Mars, evacuation was nearing completion when the first Valorian landing ships descended through the thin atmosphere. Governor Diana Walsh had stayed on the surface long after she should have retreated to the underground bunkers. Someone had to coordinate the final transports, and she had never been good at asking others to take risks she was not willing to take herself. Her aide, a young man named Christopher Lane, found her standing at the window of the governor's mansion, watching the alien ships land on the red soil of Olympus Mons. "Governor, we need to leave now," he said urgently. "The last transport is waiting." Diana shook her head slowly. "How many civilians are still above ground?" Christopher checked his tablet with trembling hands. "Approximately 12,000. They are still making their way to the tunnel entrances. Then they need more time." Diana walked to her desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a rifle she had not fired in 15 years, a memento from her days in the Marines. She picked it up and checked that it was loaded. "Tell the transport to leave without me. I will find another way down." Christopher stared at her. "Governor, that is suicide." Diana smiled sadly. "Maybe, but those 12,000 people have families waiting for them in the tunnels. Children who need their parents. If I can buy them even a few more minutes, it will be worth it." She walked out of the mansion and toward the approaching enemy. Along the way, she found others who had made the same choice. 300 volunteers, some soldiers and some civilians. All of them unwilling to leave while their people were still in danger. The Battle of Olympus Mons lasted 6 hours. Diana and her volunteers held the main approach to the tunnel entrances, fighting from behind rocks and inside craters, making the Valorians pay for every meter of ground. The aliens had better weapons and better armor, but they had never faced enemies who refused to retreat, who kept fighting even when they were wounded, who seemed to welcome death if it meant taking more of the enemy with them. Diana was hit 3 times during the battle. She kept fighting. When her rifle ran out of ammunition, she picked up a Valorian weapon from a fallen enemy and taught herself to use it in the middle of combat. When that weapon failed, she used a knife. When the knife broke, she used her fists. The Valorians eventually overwhelmed the position, but by then the tunnels were sealed and the civilians were safe. Diana's body was never recovered from the battlefield, but her final transmission sent in the last moments before the enemy overran her position was heard by every human in the solar system. "They bleed just like we do," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. "Remember that. They are not gods. They are not invincible. They bleed and they die and they can be beaten. Never forget that. Never give up. Never surrender. The transmission ended in static. On Earth, Admiral Patricia Cole listened to Diana's final words and felt tears running down her face. She wiped them away and turned back to her tactical display. Mars had fallen, but the Valorians had paid a terrible price for it. And the war was just beginning. She began planning the next phase of the defense. Knowing that Diana's sacrifice would not be in vain. 3 months had passed since the war began. The Valorians had captured Mars and established a blockade around Earth. Their ships patrolled every approach to the planet, and their soldiers occupied the ruins of human colonies throughout the outer solar system. By every measure the Valorians used to judge victory, they were winning. High Commander Xerath should have been celebrating. Instead, he spent his nights staring at casualty reports that made no sense to him. The collective had lost 62 warships. 43,000 soldiers were dead. More casualties than their last 5 conquests combined, against a species that had only discovered how to leave their own planet a few decades ago. Against primitives who still used chemical rockets and projectile weapons, his advisors offered explanations. The humans were desperate. Desperate species sometimes fought harder than expected. Once they understood that defeat was inevitable, they would break like all the others had broken. But Xerath had studied the reports carefully, and he was beginning to suspect that his advisors were wrong. The humans were not fighting like a desperate species. They were fighting like something else entirely, something the Valorians had never encountered before. When human ships were disabled in battle, the crews did not surrender. They overloaded their reactors and rammed themselves into Valorian vessels, destroying both ships in nuclear fire. When human soldiers were surrounded and outnumbered, they called artillery strikes on their own positions, killing themselves along with the enemies around them. They booby-trapped their own dead, so Valorian soldiers who tried to collect trophies died in explosions. And they learned. Every battle, human tactics improved. They studied captured Valorian technology and found weaknesses that should have taken decades to discover. They built new weapons that exploited those weaknesses. They adapted faster than any species Xerath had ever seen. On Earth, Admiral Patricia Cole coordinated the resistance from a bunker complex deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. The facility had been built during the old nuclear tensions between nations, designed to survive atomic war. Now it served as the last headquarters of human military command. Her staff had shrunk to a few dozen officers and technicians. Most of Earth's military leadership had been killed in the first weeks of the war. When Valorian strikes destroyed command centers around the globe, Patricia had survived because she was in orbit when the attacks came. And she had made her way back to Earth through the blockade in a damaged shuttle that the Valorians did not bother to chase. She spent her days analyzing enemy tactics and her nights planning counterattacks. Sleep was a luxury she could not afford. Food was something she ate only when her body threatened to collapse. The only thing that mattered was finding a way to hurt the enemy. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A civilian scientist named Eleanor Hayes had been studying the wreckage of a Valorian shuttle that crashed in northern Canada. She was a physicist, not a weapons designer. But she noticed something strange in the shield generator's design. Their shields oscillate at a specific frequency. She explained in a video message sent to Patricia's bunker. If we can match that frequency with our weapons, we can punch through them like they are not even there. It took 2 weeks to design new weapons based on Eleanor's discovery. The first field test destroyed a Valorian patrol ship with a single shot from a weapon that had previously done no damage at all. Patricia watched the footage and felt hope for the first time in months. Lieutenant Samuel Harris led the first major counterattack using the new weapons. He was 28 years old, former police officer from Denver, who had joined the resistance after the Valorians destroyed his city. His team consisted of 30 soldiers, all of them volunteers. All of them carrying weapons modified with Eleanor's frequency technology. Their target was a Valorian supply depot that had been established in the ruins of Denver. The depot contained food, ammunition, and medical supplies for the occupation forces across the western continent. Destroying it would cripple Valorian operations for weeks. Samuel and his team approached the depot under cover of darkness. The Valorians had guards posted around the perimeter, but they were careless. They had never faced enemies who could threaten them on the ground. They believed their personal shields made them invulnerable. The first guard died without knowing what had happened. Samuel's rifle punched through the alien's shield and armor like they were made of paper. The second and third guards fell just as quickly. By the time the alarm was raised, Samuel's team was inside the depot. The battle lasted 40 minutes. The humans moved through the facility methodically, destroying everything they could not carry. When Valorian reinforcements arrived, they found nothing but smoking wreckage and the bodies of their comrades. Samuel's team had vanished into the mountains without losing a single soldier. On Mars, the occupation was proving equally difficult. The surviving colonists had retreated into the tunnel networks that spread beneath the planet's surface. These tunnels had been dug over decades of mining operations, and they stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. The Valorians could not map them all, and every time they sent soldiers underground, those soldiers were ambushed and killed. Daniel Patterson had become the leader of the Martian resistance. He was a mining engineer, not a soldier, but he knew the tunnels better than anyone alive. He organized the colonists into small cells that operated independently, striking at Valorian positions and then disappearing before the enemy could respond. The Valorians tried everything to root out the resistance. They pumped poison gas into the tunnels. The humans had gas masks. They collapsed tunnel entrances. The humans dug new ones. They sent robots to map the underground networks. The humans destroyed them. One Valorian officer complained in a report that was later captured by human intelligence. Fighting humans underground is like fighting ghosts. They appear from nowhere, kill our soldiers, and vanish before we can retaliate. We have lost more troops in these tunnels than we lost conquering the last 3 worlds combined. Commander Zyrith read the report and felt something he had not felt in 3 centuries of warfare. He felt afraid, not of losing. The Valorians still had overwhelming superiority in ships and soldiers. They would eventually win this war through sheer numbers, if nothing else. But victory would cost them far more than it should. Far more than any conquest had ever cost before. He sent a message to the collective High Council requesting reinforcements. For the first time in his long career, he admitted that a campaign was not going as planned. He did not tell them that he had begun to wonder if the humans might actually win. He could not even admit that possibility to himself. But deep in his heart, in a place he did not like to examine, the fear continued to grow. The reinforcement fleet arrived 6 months after the war began. 2,000 warships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming in the light of the distant sun. Grand Admiral Thexus commanded them from her flagship, the Immortal Judgment, and she had been sent with a simple mission: end this embarrassing war against a primitive species that should have been conquered in days. Thexus was the most decorated military leader in Valorian history. She had planned and executed victories that expanded the collective's territory by 1/3. She had never lost a campaign, and she did not intend to start now. But as she reviewed the intelligence reports from the past 6 months, she began to understand why High Commander Zyrith had requested help. The humans had learned to build hyperdrives. They had reverse-engineered the technology from captured Valorian ships, a process that should have taken decades. Their first faster-than-light vessel had been completed 2 months ago. Since then, they had built a dozen more. And those ships were striking at Valorian supply lines throughout the outer solar system. Their weapons had improved dramatically as well. The frequency-modulated rifles that had been a curiosity 3 months ago were now standard issue for human ground forces. Human scientists were working on even more advanced technology, developing new ways to exploit Valorian weaknesses. But what disturbed Thexus's most was something that could not be measured in weapons or ships. The humans simply refused to give up. Every species the Valorians had conquered eventually accepted defeat. They surrendered when the situation became hopeless. They chose survival over resistance. The humans did not. They fought even when they were outnumbered. They died rather than surrender. They attacked positions they had no chance of taking, just to make the Valorians pay for their presence. It was not rational behavior. It was something else entirely. Thexus called it madness. Her psychological advisors had another word for it. They called it defiance. Admiral Patricia Cole had been preparing for this moment since the war began. She knew the Valorians would send reinforcements eventually. She knew that humanity's only chance was to strike before those reinforcements could be fully deployed. The target she chose was the Valorian command station orbiting Earth, a massive structure that coordinated all enemy operations in the inner solar system. The attack would require every ship humanity had left. 47 vessels, most of them damaged, all of them crewed by people who knew they probably would not survive. Patricia called a meeting of her commanders and explained the plan. She did not try to hide the odds. "Most of us will not come back," she said simply. "The Valorians outnumber us 10 to 1, and their ships are more powerful than ours. But if we can destroy that command station, we can throw their entire fleet into chaos. Their command structure is rigid. Without orders from above, their captains do not know how to adapt." She paused and looked at each face on the screens around her. "I am not asking you to die for nothing. I am asking you to die for something. For Earth, for everyone we have already lost. For the chance that our species might survive." No one refused. The fleet gathered in the shadow of the moon, hidden from Valorian sensors by the rock itself. Patricia commanded from the bridge of the carrier Defiance, the largest ship they had left. She had chosen the name herself after Diana Walsh's final transmission. The battle began at dawn, Earth time. Human ships burst from behind the moon and drove straight toward the command station. The Valorians responded immediately, hundreds of warships moving to intercept. The sky above Earth filled with fire. Patricia watched the tactical display and gave orders calmly, even as ships around her were destroyed. She directed formations, coordinated attacks, and found weakness after weakness in the Valorian defense. Her ships used the debris of destroyed vessels as cover. They attacked in waves that overwhelmed Valorian targeting systems. They did things that no sane military doctrine would have recommended. The Defiance was hit 3 times in the first hour. Each time, the damage control team sealed the breaches and kept fighting. Patricia refused to leave the bridge, even when her officers begged her to evacuate to a safer part of the ship. "This is where I belong," she said. "Keep firing." By the 4th hour, half the human fleet was gone. But so were over 100 Valorian ships, and the command station was within range. Patricia ordered all remaining vessels to concentrate their fire on a single point in the station's hull. Where Eleanor Hayes had identified a structural weakness, the station's shields held for 20 minutes under the concentrated assault. Then they failed, and the human weapons began tearing into the structure itself. Explosions rippled across the station's surface. Escape pods launched in every direction as the crew tried to flee, but the station was still functioning. Its weapons were still firing, and the human fleet was almost gone. Patricia looked at the damage reports for the Defiance. Engines failing. Weapons nearly depleted. Life support compromised. Her ship was dying, and so were the people aboard it. She made her decision. "All hands, abandon ship," she ordered. "Get to the escape pods." Now, her first officer, a young woman named Laura Kim, stared at her. "Admiral, what about you?" Patricia smiled sadly. "Someone needs to fly this ship. The station is wounded but not dead. I intend to finish the job." The crew evacuated. Patricia stayed on the bridge, alone except for the few officers who refused to leave her. She set a course for the heart of the damaged command. Stationed and pushed the Defiance's engines to their maximum. Output, her last transmission was heard by both sides of the battle. "Wanted Earth," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Come and take it." The Defiance struck the command station at full speed. The explosion was visible from the surface of Earth, a new star burning briefly in the morning sky. When the light faded, the command station was gone. The effect on the Valorian fleet was immediate and catastrophic. Their rigid hierarchy meant that losing their command center left subordinate ships without clear orders. Some tried to continue the battle. Others began to retreat. None of them coordinated with each other. Human ships exploited the confusion ruthlessly, destroying over 300 vessels before the Valorians could reorganize. On the ground, the liberation of Earth began. Resistance cells that had been hiding for months emerged from their shelters and attacked Valorian positions across the globe. In Beijing, a factory worker named Grace Liu led an uprising that captured the regional command center. In Johannesburg, a teacher named Peter Okonkwo organized a guerrilla campaign that cut off enemy supply lines. In Buenos Aires, a teenage girl named Maria Santos picked up a fallen soldier's rifle and killed 3 Valorian officers before anyone realized what was happening. Grand Admiral Thexis watched her carefully planned campaign collapse into chaos. She had 2,000 ships at her command, more than enough to crush the human resistance eventually. But eventually was not good enough. The High Council wanted quick victories, not long campaigns. They wanted proof that the collective was still invincible. She made a decision that would have been unthinkable. Before this war, she ordered a full retreat from the inner solar system. Her fleet would regroup in the outer reaches, consolidate their forces, and return with overwhelming strength. It was not defeat, she told herself. It was strategic repositioning, but she knew in her heart that it felt like defeat. And she suspected the humans knew it too. 1 year had passed since the war began. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted, least of all the Valorian collective that had ruled it for 12,000 years. The retreat from human space had not ended the conflict. It had only been the beginning of something far worse. The humans had followed their enemy into the stars. Using ships built with a combination of their own ingenuity and captured Valorian technology, their fleet was small compared to the collective's armada. But it struck with precision and fury at supply lines, forward bases, and communication relays throughout Valorian territory. But the ships were not the greatest threat. The greatest threat was the idea, for millennia. The collective had maintained control over conquered species through a simple principle. Resistance was futile. No one had ever successfully challenged Valorian authority. No one had ever fought back and won. The conquered species accepted their fate because they believed they had no choice. Now they knew differently. Word spread through the galaxy about the small blue planet that had refused to surrender, about the primitive species that had destroyed Valorian fleets and liberated their own world, about the humans who had proven that the collective could be beaten. Rebellions began on 100 worlds. Species that had been slaves for centuries rose up against their masters. They used tactics the humans had pioneered, attacking supply lines and communication networks, hiding among civilian populations, refusing to surrender even when the situation seemed hopeless. The collective did not have enough soldiers to fight on all fronts. They had maintained their empire through intimidation, not occupation. Now that the intimidation had failed, they discovered that their military was spread too thin to maintain control. High Commander Zyrith was executed for his failure. Grand Admiral Thexis was recalled to face tribunal for her retreat. The collective council met in emergency session. For the first time in recorded history, they debated whether to sue for peace. On Earth, the rebuilding had begun. The war had cost humanity dearly. Millions of people were dead. Cities that had stood for centuries were ruins. Entire regions had been rendered uninhabitable by Valorian weapons. Mars' colony was slowly recovering, but it would be years before it returned to its former strength. But humanity had survived. More than survived, they had won. Admiral Patricia Cole was awarded every honor humanity could give, posthumously. Her sacrifice at the Battle of Earth had become a symbol of what humans could accomplish when they refused to accept defeat. The new flagship of the human fleet was named the Cole in her memory, and her final transmission was inscribed on monuments across the planet. Governor Diana Walsh received similar honors. Her stand at Olympus Moms had saved 12,000 lives and had shown the galaxy that humans would die before they would surrender. The main settlement on Mars was renamed Walsh City, and her rifle was preserved in a museum where children could see it and learn about what she had done. The peace negotiations took place on neutral ground, a space station in unclaimed territory. The human delegation was led by Secretary General Angela Price. She was Kevin Price's mother, and she had spent the war coordinating the global resistance from a bunker in Switzerland. She had lost her husband in the first days of the war and had nearly lost her son a dozen times since then. but she had never stopped fighting, and she had never lost hope. The Valorian delegation was led by a new high commander, a younger officer named Kethros, who had studied human tactics and understood what his predecessors had not. He looked at Angela Price across the negotiating table and saw something that frightened him deeply. He saw a species that had been pushed to the edge of extinction, and had pushed back. The humans did not ask for much in the negotiations. They wanted recognition of their sovereignty. They wanted the right to travel and trade freely in galactic space. They wanted compensation for the damage done to their worlds. These were reasonable requests, and Kethros was prepared to grant all of them. But the humans also had a demand that was not negotiable. Angela Price delivered it herself, her voice calm but unyielding. "No species will be conquered by the collective again," she said. "Any world that asks for human protection will receive it. Any species that wishes to fight for its freedom will have our support. Your empire was built on the belief that resistance is futile. We have proven that belief wrong. Now, we will prove it wrong across the galaxy." Kethros stared at her. He was young, by Valorian standards, barely 200 years old, but he had seen enough to understand what she was saying. "You are asking us to dismantle our entire civilization," he said slowly. "The collective has existed for 12,000 years. You would see it fall." Angela nodded. "Your collective declared war on a species you considered primitive and insignificant. You expected us to surrender or die. You never imagined we might win. You never imagined we might come for you." She leaned forward, and her eyes were hard as steel. "You signed your own death sentence the moment you attacked us. We are simply here to carry out that sentence." The negotiations lasted 3 days. In the end, the Valorians agreed to every human demand. They had no choice. Their empire was crumbling around them, their military was overextended, and their subject species were rising up across the galaxy. The war with humanity had broken something fundamental in the collective's power structure. It could not be repaired. Within a decade, the Valorian collective had fragmented into dozens of independent states. The species they had conquered for millennia were finally free. Some struggled with their newfound independence. Others flourished. All of them remembered who had shown them that freedom was possible. Humanity took its place among the stars, not as conquerors, but as liberators. They built alliances with species that had been slaves. They shared their technology with worlds that were still recovering from Valorian rule. They became known throughout the galaxy as the species that had done the impossible. Kevin Price. Now an admiral himself stood on the bridge of the Cole and looked out at the stars. He thought about his father who had died in the first days of the war. He thought about Patricia Cole, who had given her life to save Earth. He thought about Diana Walsh, who had held the line on Mars until the last civilian was safe. He thought about all the people who had died so that humanity could survive. And he thought about all the people who would live because of what they had done. A young officer approached him with a report. Another world had requested human protection. Another species wanted to learn how to fight for its freedom. Kevin smiled and gave the order to set course. The war against the Valorians was over, but the work of building a free galaxy had only begun. The galaxy had learned a lesson it would never forget. Humans were not the strongest species in the universe. They were not the most advanced, nor the most numerous. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards, and their bodies were fragile compared to many other races. But they were stubborn beyond all reason. They were creative beyond all expectation. They adapted faster than anyone thought possible, and they absolutely refused to accept defeat. When the Valorian collective declared war on humanity, they believed they were starting a simple conquest. They believed they would add another world to their empire and forget about it within a century. Instead, they had awakened something they did not understand. Something that would not surrender, would not break, would not stop fighting until it was free. They had attacked humanity, and humanity had ended them. That was the lesson the galaxy learned. That was the story that would be told for thousands of years. And that was why, whenever a tyrant rose to threaten the peace, they always looked over their shoulder. Because somewhere out there, the humans were watching, and the humans never forgot.